Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. So obviously one of the difficult things about metaphysics, just in general, is that it requires a very different presence of mind to very ordinary, normal experience that we don't typically have throughout the day. So for me, it's like trying to brush a bunch of rust off of my poor little metaphysical habitus that is suffering greatly from years of disuse or misuse, whatever. And of course, for you guys, it's also a challenge. There's a kind of purification. Metaphysics is not usually something that is incredibly satisfying or rewarding. There are some very key, valuable insights that we can gain, and we're like, we start to see things a little bit more clearly. We're like, that's great. But one time, Father Thomas, who's the prior general of the brothers, talking about doing metaphysics as like a lifelong sort of endeavor, said, I think that that's why it's part of our monastic life, because there's something penitential about it. It's not. It's a good kind of penance. See, there's penance that's just kind of dumb, like beating yourself with a whip. That's just kind of dumb. I mean, it could be helpful, sure, but. And then there's penance where you're really actually actively trying to remove the plaque from between your thought patterns and your mind and the way that you see reality. And it's not like entertaining at all. It's not fun at all. It can be a kind of challenge that you're like, ooh, interesting. And then once you've sort of seen the different directions of metaphysics, you could be like, okay, I've seen basically where this goes. It requires a lot of effort and energy to keep up the attention and things like that in order to do it, so I'm done and check out. I mean, that's what most people would do if they ever even encountered metaphysics. So understandably, it is a very ultimate engagement of our intellect, and understandably one that pretty much nobody wants to spend too much time with. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not valuable. I know you guys read the introduction to Fides et Ratio, and the church really does point out how important it is to metaphysics, perhaps today more so than at any other time. And that's because of the extent and the amount of ideologies that we have, that we bathe in regularly. And metaphysics has an incredible potency of purification. So, I mean, if you're into that, that's good stuff. If you're not, it will understandably be not just a challenge, but also sort of off-putting. So, good luck. Now, we talked about substance. When you, and I hope John Timothy did this with you a little bit. I'm just going to hit it just in case he didn't. When you are asking questions about your experience, there's the 4 or 5 famous questions that you can ask, right? Mm-hmm. That lead you to discover the 4 or 5 causes. Now, in the experience of the living being, you can do that and say, or art, let's just start with art because it's easier, or work. What is the formal cause of work? That's easy. It's the idea that has become a project. And what is the material cause? Well, in there it's whatever you're using as you work through your idea. So it's the matter. Being transformed. To be transformed. Efficient cause. In other words, what starts the movement of work? It's my motivation. No. What's the most motivating thing you can have when you work? A great idea. I just had a great idea. That's incredibly motivating. Motivating. Efficient, the motive cause. You'll see that sometimes in St. Thomas Aquinas. Motive, that translation. So motive cause, efficient cause, same thing. The origin, where is this coming from? Where is this? Well, it's the idea, but it's the idea in its proximity to realization, to the project. So the closer my idea is to my ability to make it happen, the more effectively my idea is an efficient cause. In other words, I can have ideas about things I could do, but the actual ability that I would have to do it is limited, so that idea isn't a very good efficient cause. But it's the efficient cause. The idea is the efficient cause to the extent that it's close to real work possibilities. Some people think that their idea could really work out, and then they try a little bit, and it's a dead end. So, in fact, the idea wasn't really close to real work possibilities, so give up. And then the final cause, that which is drawing the work directionally in its execution, is the finished project. Work will continue until what I was trying to do is finished. And so that finished project, finished work, is the final cause of work. Fortunately, we use work both as the verb and the noun, so it seems like we're repeating ourselves. But so there's the finished work, the thing that you did, that you made, and then there's the work, the process that goes into arriving at that finished project, that finished work. So now, great, in art it's pretty clear. Now we can come back to our experience, our metaphysical kind of experience, and ask ourselves, well, I've had all of these different experiences of things that exist. What can I say about being? What is the cause of being? Okay, so those causes, well, I could look at them again in terms of, formal, material, efficient, final cause. Did you do this with John Timothy? Ish.
Okay. He was saying that the final cause is what is it for? Like the purpose. What's the sake of for the sake of what?
So when you work, it's for the sake of
the
finished product.
Okay.
And then our finished work or finished thing, whatever.
Okay.
The result, that your labor has a result. Now,
I thought it was that, like, what is the table for? Like, not what is my work on
the table, as an artificial reality, has a purpose also.
Oh, so that's
but it's independent of the work that I put into it.
Itself, that's what we're looking at.
That was, in that example, that's what we were looking at. But
Oh, I'm tracking.
you can analyze all different sides of that. You can analyze,
Thanks. Yep.
all that stuff. Okay, so now we're going to analyze this experience of being, as being. And that's the experience that we have by the judgment of existence, which I'm sure you guys talked about. And the judgment of existence leads me to affirm beyond the sensible properties of something, its existence. So this table, not just how it feels, not just that it's here, but that it exists, that it is. This exists. So I can know that about the table. It is. What is? That's my question. I just said this is. Well, what is? This is. This exists. Okay, what is exists? What is this is? That's this question that's looking for being as me. And as Aristotle reminds us in that first, in the thing we read about the substance, whoever is asking, that question is looking for a cause. Otherwise, the question is meaningless. The question is meaningless about being. What is being as being, qua being? So, what is it? And we looked at that, okay, the formal cause. So we know that we can ask, what is being as being? And that leads us to a discovery of its formal cause. The formal cause of being, substance. What we call substance, the substance ousia. Substance / or ousia, that's right. The cause, a principle. Now, can we ask about what being is made of? What is being as being made of? Now, I can talk about what is this being made of, this table, and this table is made of wood. Right. Okay, now I want to know, this existence, as existence, what is its existence made of? Well, its existence as existence is not made of anything. It's not made of wood. Its being isn't made of wood. What it is, a table, is made of wood. But that act of intelligence, of my mind that I'm able to come to in touching this table and knowing that it exists, that content of that judgment does not imply a material component. It is beyond simply its material aspect. So this question in metaphysics gets thrown out. Did you guys do this with John? No. Okay. So material cause, I can't really ask the material cause of being. I can ask the material cause of certain beings that are made of something, but being as being isn't made of something. It's before the made of something issue even comes around. Now, the efficient cause. Can I ask the efficient cause about being? What would that question be? If I'm trying to find out what the efficient cause of being is, what question am I asking?
Where does it come from?
Right. What is the origin? What is the source of being as being? Can I ask that question in philosophy? Immediately, I can't. Because being is simply given. I have no way of coming back to the origin of being in terms of an efficient cause. Because the efficient cause always implies a movement. And that movement implies matter. So efficient cause. Now you can look at the efficient cause in a different way, but the efficient cause for our experience always has to do with a kind of transformation. It's the origin of a movement. It's the origin of a change. It's the origin of something that happens. And happening means matter. There's no way for there to be successive moments or a change without there being something that can be changed. Do you have a thought?
Even if it's like you trace it back to like a thought of God, you can't do that.
In philosophy, that's not going to be anything that the philosopher would do spontaneously, because what we understand about efficient cause is really tied. And even when you talk about the ideas of God in theology, in revealed theology, because you won't talk about ideas of God in natural theology, but the ideas of God in Thomistic theology are looking at this effect that God has on matter.
Well, because the question though, right, is, am I following you correctly, Father, where it's like, even if we're looking at God, like his existence, his being, you couldn't really ask, where does his being come from? Right? Because, I mean, is that the point? Because it's like being itself just is. It's not like it comes from, I thought I had a thought worth sharing.
You do. I mean, and it's difficult to try to put into words.
Well, because you're saying efficient is there's something that moves, something that happens. With
Yeah,
being
in our
as
experience,
being, whether you're talking about God or us or the table, being as being, we're just looking at existence itself. It's not something that came in. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not. Yeah.
The changes that we may perceive or we may experience at a level of being are immaterial also. And so this efficient cause, which is really talking about a material movement, it's really what that question is getting at. And so if it's used in theology, it's used in an analogical way to speak about a spiritual movement, but does the spirit move? Well, it's not in a place and it's not made of anything. So speaking about moving doesn't make sense. But there's the movement of love. There's the movement of light. I mean, even in the physical world, does light move? Everything else seems to move, but light doesn't. That's one way of looking at it.
So this is all based on our direct experience.
Yeah, so that's what we're trying to do, is base this on our direct experience. So being as being, the efficient cause seems to get really kind of thrown out at that point, because we know that all of our understanding of the efficient cause has to do with a change which itself implies something material. And my basic experience of this efficient cause is I hear something. Where did that come from? Something moved. Something moved in me, my digestion. What is causing my digestion to do that? Okay, so for being as being, we can throw it out. For the final cause, what is being as being for? Now, our risk as we hear those words in English is to hear immediately some kind of utility or some kind of use. What is being as being for? It's like, what can I use it for? It's kind of what we hear spontaneously. Whereas the for the final cause is really talking about its purpose, end, fullness. And that's what's interesting about looking at the final cause in metaphysics, is it sort of corrects and adjusts our understanding of what the final cause is anyway, for everything else in our experience. Because we have a tendency to reduce the final cause to a kind of utility or a kind of formal definition of the design. Okay, it's designed this way, so therefore its purpose is this. And so all of the final causality that we think of is always first from the form. Whereas the final cause can and has to be discovered independently of the formal cause. So let me explain that in one other way that probably makes sense. I can know substantially the nature, human nature, what I am. Therefore, if I know what I am, I know what I'm for. And so all of my purpose and this principle of end is based on a structural knowledge of the capacities of my existence. I know I can think, therefore I should think. That's what my end is. I know that the highest thing that I can do is love, therefore I should love. That's what. And so our whole understanding of the final cause becomes filtered through this other causality, the substance, which is my nature. If I know what I am, then I know what I'm for. And there's something wrong about that in philosophy, believe it or not. It's not enough. There's a deeper way to understand and to discover the final cause independently of the formal cause. And that's where there's an incredible genius in Aristotle, is to bring us out of a finality that I simply give myself, an end that I give myself simply based on, well, I know what I am, therefore I have to know what I'm for because I know what I am. So the final cause of being as being is act. It's this principle that we call act. And in some translations, I can't remember exactly how it's put in this one that I gave you, you'll see the word actuality, actuation, activity. In the community, we've decided simply to shorten it to act, to take away, because a big piece of the purification in philosophy is to get away from the immediate notions that the words we use give us. Activity immediately makes us think of like doing something. And the principle of act is not doing something. At the level of being, that's not what the principle of act is. It's just simply doing something. Actuation could make us think of, I don't know, your credit card getting activated. Like it was, when it came in the mail, useless, and then you push in the phone number, and suddenly it's active. Active makes us think of energy, makes us think of a lot of different things. So we use the word act just to try to move away from the immediate conclusions that would be drawn about what this principle is. If we base our understanding of the words on our immediate usage of them, activity, actuality, etc. Any questions about that?
Well, have you not gotten into what is meant by act? You were saying kind of what it doesn't mean, but
right.
I may not be tracking, or maybe you haven't gotten there yet.
We're getting there.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so we haven't gotten there yet. But it's true that if it's difficult to speak about substance, it's even more difficult to speak about act. And when I say speak, I mean like use words to say something that communicates a meaning. Because what we're dealing with this principle of act is something so ultimate. The only way to get there, just as we did with substance, is by analogy. When we're talking about discovering the substance, we use the analogy of the syllable, right? There's the elements, and then there's the whole, and the whole is something other than just the combination of its elements. Act, we can also only know by analogy. And we're looking for it here, not only as like a kind of fulfillment, or fullness of human life, but of being as being. So even though our most perfect direct experience of being is that of other human beings that we come into contact with, they will not, if we only see this final cause through the filter of what we know from human experience, then we don't allow it to tell us something about being as being. And being is bigger and larger, is even more specific than human being. Being as being is both incredibly general. Everything that we experience exists, otherwise we wouldn't experience it. And yet at the same time, there's something absolutely unique about any experience that I have of something that exists. Being is both radically unique in all of its instances and completely universal to everything that exists. So there's this fantastic sort of diversity, analogy that's possible with being. And if we want to see being as being and discover this and discover act at the level of being, we have to be careful not to just only use the analogies for it that we have from our own experience, but see that the analogies that and we're going to get into what those are, the analogies that we have for act that come from our own experience are trying to tell us something about being as such. Not simply about my own being, not simply about other human beings, but about what being as being is for. And for is a terrible word because it immediately deadens our understanding into something a little bit less. So just as the substance is the principle of being, principle and cause, of being as being, along the lines of the form, right, the formal cause, so act is the principle and cause of being as being, in the line of the end, for lack of a better way of putting it. And this is where really we begin to see that our words are very limited. What we can say clearly is could be summed up pretty quickly. And so the ability to then make this induction of act, discovery of this principle of act at the level of being, is going to require an extensive set of analogies, lots of different experiences that we can look at together. And that's what we'll see in Aristotle's reading here, in the line of the end. Or with the end in view. So as in your thought, you are trying to know what something is. As in your thought, in another way, you're trying to know what something is for. And that way of thinking, and that line of thinking, and that line of thought, that's where this discovery of the principle of act takes place. As you're looking at an analogy to kind of focus on being as being. It's a complicated way of putting it. It's very simple, so simple that it hurts. So let's jump in. If you have questions, now would be a great time. Any questions are fine. Now would be a great time. And then we're going to shift into the reading portion, which will Aristotle will help us see by analogy this other induction. This is the ultimate part of philosophy. This is the highest, most difficult part of philosophy. Hegel would say the same thing. This Thomas Aquinas, the same thing. This is the piece that most people just ignore and don't even worry about it. The form is so clear and so simple that having a good grasp of the principle of act just seems superfluous. In fact, so grave has that been that in modern times, kind of even at the time of like scholasticism, high scholasticism, you had people saying that the final cause was simply metaphorical. Instead of discovered by analogy, that it's metaphorical, which means that this final cause doesn't produce or create a true causality in my life or on being as such, but it only appears that way. There is an end, and everything is striving towards it, but the end itself doesn't draw me, lead me to it. The end itself doesn't compel being as being into a fullness, a state of fullness. And so act isn't a real principle, it's only a metaphorical one that we use to understand how things work. That's this error that was introduced after Aristotle, but people were still using the language of act, actuality, things like that. And then it finally came out, probably several hundred years ago, well, the final cause is just, it's a metaphor.
But you're saying that's a mistake. That's a misunderstanding. That's a misunderstanding.
What it is it's falling back once again on a formal understanding of what my being is. If this is what I am, this is what I'm for. But it doesn't say that there's actually a discovery of what I'm for based on an attraction that draws me out independently of me having some kind of knowledge about what my capacities are. I know I'm capable of knowing the truth, therefore I'm supposed to. Well, wait, discovering the truth itself, the truth becomes then a principle that draws me towards it.
Almost whether I'm aware of it or not.
Whether, I don't need to know that that's what my mind is for.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a kind of sickening effect on human nature, kind of scarring that happens after a lot of critical thinking has happened and then been put into words, where the form becomes much more important than the end because it's that much clearer. End, you don't control it. You can perceive that it has its own capacity to move or to affect in its own way at the level of being, and that it's not just a result of having a particular form. If at any point I make things less clear than they were, then just probably ignore what I said. Anything that would make it less clear. Okay. Let us then is it chapter 6? Okay, so this whole book, Theta, as I said again, is on act and potency. Right? And we started out with this little example about the chicken and the egg. An egg is potentially a chicken. It's not potentially anything else. So there is already in the egg a perfection that the egg is waiting to become. There's an end that egg is like already in what it is directed towards. And that's a perfect chicken. Now, the chicken is not there. Actually there. It's not in act.
You mean the adult chicken.
Right, the adult chicken is not there in act. But in another way, the adult chicken is there in act. Because
if it's a fertilizing. So the
Sure.
reason is because on campus, people would throw this thing out and it would just.
Right, but I would say even if it's an unfertilized egg, I mean, unless it's already corrupting, unless it's already like missed its mark and no longer capable of, I mean, it doesn't have to yet be fertilized to still have that fullness, because it's waiting for the fertilization, which is simply a piece of that active waiting. So the struggle here is to see in analogies like that how being as such, no matter which being it is, there's this principle of act that is present. So there is a drawing towards, a leading out, an attraction towards the fullness of whatever something is at the level of its being, already present. Do I not have already everything I need to be perfectly me? That's kind of am I missing something? A formal perspective is going to at some point have to say, yes, you're still missing something. But a perspective of the final cause says it's impossible for you to be missing anything. And that, it blows our minds, because if we look at it from a formal perspective, it's true, we're missing stuff. There's things that are missing. But in a final perspective, the perspective from the final cause, you can't be missing anything. There is nothing that could possibly be missing. It's like, well, God has provided for us with everything. Well, yeah, He has, but we have to do a lot of work. We have to make it work and stuff. But still, the world that God created has in it everything that we need. He did not create a world that is not adapted to human beings. It just is more difficult in some places than others, sure. Doesn't mean that it wasn't in that act of creation. Let's get into the reading. Okay, this one's a little bit shorter than the other one. Okay. Since we've treated of the kind of potency which is related to movement, let us discuss actuality. So there in Greek, we've used this before a little bit, the words are energeia. So the words for
movement?
No, for actuality. And so the word for potency is dunamis, power, potency, dunamis. It's a pretty common one. You see that in the scriptures a lot as well, in Greek. And here it says the kind of potency that's related to, the word is translated movement here, but in the Greek it's energeia both times. The kind of potency that's related to energeia, let us discuss energeia, its genus, and its differentia. It's the same word both times. And that was a word for act. In the course of our analysis, it will also become clear, with regard to the potential, to dunamis, that we not only ascribe dunamis, or potency, to that whose nature is to move something else, or to be moved by something else, either without qualification or in some particular way, but also use the word in another sense, in the pursuit of which we have discussed these previous senses. Actuality means the existence of the thing, not in the way which we express by potentiality. We see that potentiality, for instance, a statue of Hermes is in the block of wood.
Potentially.
Right, so potentially, thank you. We say that potentially, for instance, the statue of Hermes is in the block of wood, and the half line is in the hole, because because it might be separated out. And we call even the man who is not studying a man of science if he is capable of actually studying a particular problem. Our meaning can be seen in the particular cases by induction, and we must not seek a definition of everything, but be content to grasp the analogy. So, and that's classically the difficulty with the discovery of act, is that you can't really just define it. If I sat and you said, could you just give me the definition of act and leave me alone? I would say, unfortunately, if I did that, I would be dishonest with you. Because the only way to grasp act is by analogy. Aristotle himself says it right there. We can't have a definition of everything, but have to be content to grasp the analogy. And we grasp the analogy, and by that analogy, we make the induction. So the analogy is experience. Experience gives me the different poles that I can use for an analogy. A diversity of experience. I can see there's common elements in each experience. Something is common in each one of them that I can't just reduce to the experience itself. And that is what allows me to begin to form an analogy. And from that analogy, I can then make that induction, discover the principle behind. And he's going to give us some good examples here that we can think of from our experience. And so, and here, that's where he's saying there's a difference in seeking right. We've got between act and potency. And the example he gives is, he says, the statue is already in the block of wood. All you have to do is remove the excess wood. Excess wood is there. Just get it off, and the statue's in there. It was there the whole time. Just needed the sculptor to go in and remove the stuff that wasn't supposed to be there. Get rid of it. There's the statue. It was hiding in there. So there's a potency, right? And then there's the stripping away of what was not necessary for that thing brings us to that act. The actual statue.
I'm sorry, I'm confused by because this is, I thought he was saying it's not used in that way.
Right. So, careful. So understand clearly that part, right? That there's a way of understanding a relationship between act and potency that has to do with simply stripping away the excess, and there's something else that's underlying that. Mm-hmm. There's another way of understanding the difference between act and potency, and that's the one that we want to focus on.
Okay.
Can you explain what you mean by potency again?
So, potency, potential. Would you say that on a blank canvas there is potential for an idea that you have?
Sure.
And so it's already potentially there, but it's not really or actually there.
What about
the act is potentially there, or just the idea?
Okay, you've got a blank slate. It's like when we talk about people that have a lot of potential. You know, something could become manifest and real. We know it's in you. We just want to see it come out. That's potential. Okay? In this sense that we're using, the first sense of that it's there, it's just hidden.
Or often we use that as with a little sarcasm, like we're hoping they actually have potential. We haven't seen it yet, right?
Right. We
but
haven't.
He uses this example of the scientist who's not doing science at the moment.
Right.
Bree, the artist, who's not right now doing art, she's doing philosophy, but she has the potential, right? Like, isn't that how we're using potency more? Is like
there's lots of
in
different ways of
Bree.
using this word potential, and they're all good to have in mind.
Okay.
Because
that you have the potential to do art, Even though
you're
right
not
now you're
actually
not
doing it.
currently doing it. There is a latent potential in you, potency in you, because you are an artist.
Okay? And so, in a different way, the blank slate also has potential. But thanks to you, I mean, if it was just in front of me, I don't know how much potential that blank slate really has for becoming anything worth looking at. Not much. I mean, I could perhaps develop something in me, a hidden potential that I never knew I had. Probably not going to do that. But the potential that's in the blank slate is different from the potential that's in me. Both are real potential, though. Does that make sense? The word potential. Okay. So we're going to move into another understanding of this word potential that will help us towards the analogy that will get us to discover the principle of act at the level of being. But it's good to see that there's different ways that we use the word potency, the word potential. Okay, our meaning can be seen in the particular cases by induction, and we must not seek a definition of everything, but be content to grasp the analogy. That, here's the analogy, as that which is building is to that which is capable of building, so is the waking to the sleeping, and that which is seeing to that which has its eyes shut but has sight, and that which is shaped out of the matter to the matter, and that which has been wrought up to the unwrought. I don't know what those wrought words mean exactly. It's not very helpful. So let actuality be defined by one member of this antithesis, and the potential by the other. But all things are not said in the same sense to exist actually, but only by analogy. As A is in B, or to B, C is in D, or to D. For some are as movements to potency, and the others as determinate substances to some sort of matter. Okay, so that's the key meditation. And it's not like you're going to just read it and be like, oh, it's obviously there. You have to come back to your own experience and try to see these relationships of act and potency in these different experiences and see that there's something in common to all of them that you can't simply put in a definition and say, this is that principle of act. But if we can say that there are different ways of act being in relation to potency, then there is something common, right? And the difference allows us to see that we have to push our minds a little bit further to grasp what that principle is. So this is like the highest caliber kind of like pushing of thought, but it's all based on these simple experiences. That which is building is to that which is capable of building. Okay, we can understand that. There is the one who could be building a house and the one who is building a house. There's a relationship of potentiality and actuality, right? Now, the trouble is to just see each one of these individually and say, oh, well, individually, yeah, I can see act and potency there. I see act and potency there. I see act and potency there. But what you didn't necessarily see, if you weren't paying attention, is that it's a little bit different in each one of those cases. And yet, we're still always calling it act and potency because there's something deeper that's in common. And that's this philosophical discovery of the principle of act at the level of being.
Do you think that he intends this particular list of analogies right here to be exhaustive?
There's a sufficient
from as
There's
this is all the
Mhm.
different angles you could come at it from.
Not all the ones you could come at it from, but a sufficient
Okay.
difference in angles to have the basis of an analogy that would allow you to make that induction.
Mm-hmm. So I think that's what I meant. Yeah,
Mhm.
right. Because
It's enough
like
differences.
infinite number of analogies you could come up with, but as far as like
I'm not sure if it exhausts all the types of
Right.
act and potency relationships, but it has enough diversity there
okay.
to, okay. So let actuality be defined by one member of this antithesis and the potential by the other. But all things are not said in the same sense to exist actually, but only by analogy. So the actuality of building is not the same as the actuality of being awake, is not the same as the actuality of seeing, as opposed to its potency, with eyes shut, having the capacity of sight. It's not the same as the potential, the actuality, of something shaped out of matter, formed to the matter itself. So in all of those, one pole is act and the other is potency. But since there's a diversity in that relationship, the relationship between its actuality and its potency are not the same. There's a principle at the level of being to be discovered that talks about act. So we'll finish reading this, and then if there's some questions about that, great. The infinite and the void and all similar things are said to exist potentially and actually in a different sense from that in which many other things are said to exist. In other words, that which sees or walks or is seen. For of the latter class, these predicates can at sometimes truly be asserted without qualification. You can actually notice them. When you talk about the infinite existing or being a potentially existing, you have no experience of the infinite. You don't run into it. Oh, hi, infinite. But waking or sleeping, you run into that. So to talk about infinite, the void, existing potentially and actually is very different from talking about what is actually part of our experience, that which sees or walks or is seen. For the latter class, these predicates can at some time be truly asserted without qualifications. For the seen is so called sometimes because it is being seen, sometimes because it is capable of being seen. But the infinite does not exist potentially in the sense that it will ever actually have separate existence from the mind. I can think of the infinite. It's an ideal. I can do math supposing the infinite, that possibility of infinite. But I'm not going to come into contact with infinite because I am finite. Its separateness is only in knowledge. The only way I could come up with a separate way of conceiving the infinite is by thinking about it. But the fact that division never ceases to be possible gives the result that this actuality exists potentially, but not that it exists separately. Since of the actions which have a limit, none is an end, but all are relative to the end. In other words, the process of making thin is of this sort. And the things themselves, when one is making them thin, are in movement in this way, without already being that at which the movement aims. This is not an action, or at least not a complete one. It's not a full act, for it is not an end. It's just simply changing the shape. But that in which the end is present is an act. Very interesting. So the real principle of act as being is already present in the reality. That in which the end is present is an act, is one that has that principle of act. That capacity to have being and act as a principle of its own being. E.g., at the same time, we are seeing and have seen, are understanding and have understood, are thinking and have thought. But it is not true that at the same time we are learning and have learned, or are being cured and have been cured. At the same time, we are living well and have lived well, and are happy and have been happy. So once again, these are just slight different understandings of potentiality, of potency, of potential. If not, the process would have to had some time to cease, as the process of making thin ceases. But as it is, it does not cease. We are living and have lived. Of these processes, then, we must call the one set movements and the other actualities. Now here, what are the words in Greek? 30, right before 30. Yeah, movements, kinesis. So there he is talking about movements. Tas de energeas. And then about act. Call one set movement, the other act. For every movement is incomplete. Making thin, learning, walking, building. These are movements and incomplete movements. And that's where this efficient cause could be confusedly brought into metaphysics, if we're not careful. Just an understanding of act that simply has to do with movement. It is not true that at the same time we are walking and have walked, or are building and have built, or are coming to be and have come to be, or are being moved and have been moved. But if we are being moved and have been moved, what is moving us is different from what has moved us. But it is the same thing that at the same time has seen and is seeing, or is thinking and has thought. The latter sort of process, then, I call an actuality, an act, and the former a movement. So there, I think, what I get from that, and once again, it's a little bit thick, is that he's trying to draw a distinction that at the end of it. So we went through kind of the induction, and now, as a fruit of that induction, trying to understand the distinction or the difference between movement and act. And here in movement, he sees it as having a kind of external cause or secondary cause. Whereas the act is always caused by the being itself. Movement is not, but an act is always a being itself. So the act of being moved, or it's maybe by something else. So there is an activity there. There is an actuality that's something is being is active, but it is not the same as the act that comes from my being. Whereas if I'm seeing, if I'm hearing, there's that actuality that's present in my being itself, as opposed to an act that is secondary. So a little bit thick, but it's an important distinction to see. That's the same difficulty here, between movement and act, as between the efficient cause and the final cause. Seeing that final cause is really distinct and separate from an efficient cause, because it resides in the being itself. It is a principle of being, and not simply an effect of another being on my own, or a movement. Okay, we are at 11 o'clock, so we will end for the second one. So we went through, we attacked this morning, substance and act, a little kind of introduction to those two areas in metaphysics, two principal areas. This afternoon we'll talk about the human person. Should be less dense, less complicated, probably feel much happier about this stuff because there's a lot of sort of clear things that we can say about that. This evening, I would offer to you the possibility of moving the Q&A from this evening to Friday when we would typically have a Q&A. It's the reason that we have it scheduled as part of the session is, in theory, whoever the person is who is doing the session would be here also for the Q&A at the end. But since I'll be here anyway, we could move it to Friday if that was a more attractive thought for you. If you'd rather finish the session this evening, though, we can do it this evening. So,
should we think on it?
I don't need an answer right away, but I'm sure some of you probably have some immediate preferences on that.
I like the Friday option.
Okay. Anybody else?
Friday.
Okay. Because the disadvantage would be if you were planning on having a nice block in the morning on Friday to work. We will do.
Well, also I won't be here Friday. So.
Oh.
So she prefers Friday.
No, I would like to be a part of it, but I don't think that my input should.
Okay, because you wouldn't be here on Friday.
Yeah.
Why don't we go ahead and do it this evening then, unless someone has an objection that would be, because that was when it was originally
Did you say
scheduled
do
for.
it when?
This evening.
Well,
So that's when it was
I think
originally
what I'm
scheduled
trying
for.
to say is that if everybody prefers Friday, and in theory I prefer Friday, because that was my first thought. I was imagining being here. I prefer to have discussion on Friday and do my schoolwork tonight. Sounds like everybody else is probably the same, Bree. Or do you not care one way?
Yeah, Friday's great.
So I wouldn't want that plan to change because I have my own other personal plans, if you know what I mean.
Okay.
I mean, can I come to you with my own questions maybe, or?
Well, yeah, we'll figure that out. Savannah, do you have any preferences?
You said Friday.
You said Friday.
She just said.
Okay, sorry, I didn't hear.
That's okay.
Apologize. Good. Okay, let's pray. Then. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.